I remember the first signs of that winter, like they happened yesterday. The air turned sharp and bitter almost overnight, and the smell of snow lingered in the mornings, even before the first flakes touched the ground. At first, we weren't worried. Living on a farm, you learn to expect the seasons, to roll with their rhythm. But this winter, it came different. Stronger, colder, heavier, as if the earth itself had decided to test us. My family and I had spent the autumn gathering hay, fixing the roofs on the barns, and stocking up on firewood. We thought we were ready. Everyone in the village said the same. It will be a hard one, but we'll manage. People always say that. Nobody ever wants to admit that nature can break you. By late November, the snow came early and fast. At first, it was beautiful. The white blanket covered the fields, the roof sparkled under the pale sun, and the animals seemed almost playful, kicking through the soft drifts. But then the snow didn't stop. It kept falling, and the temperature kept sinking. Each morning was colder than the last, and each evening the winds grew sharper. Our cows were restless. You could hear their breath in the frosty air, steaming like smoke, their bodies pressed together for warmth. The chickens refused to leave their coop, and even the dogs stopped barking at night, curling tightly near the stove instead. One evening, as I carried buckets of water from the well, my breath froze on my scarf and turned it stiff. My father stood beside the barn door, watching the horizon. His face was pale, not from the cold, but from worry. "Do you think we have enough hay?" I asked him, setting the buckets down, my hands raw and burning. He hesitated. That hesitation said more than any words could. "We'll manage," he finally replied. But I could tell by the way his eyes didn't meet mine that he wasn't sure. The truth was, the harvest that year had been weaker. The summer rains hadn't been kind, and the fields didn't yield the hay we normally counted on. We had stacked the bales high, filling the lofts and sheds, but somewhere in the back of our minds, we all knew, if the winter dragged too long, it might not be enough. By December, the snowdrifts were taller than me. The paths to the barn had to be dug out every morning with shovels, and by the time evening came, they were buried again. The wind howled through the cracks in the walls like a wild beast, rattling the windows and lifting the loose shingles from the roofs. One night, I woke to a strange sound, the groaning of wood. The weight of the snow on the old shed roof had grown too heavy. My father and I stumbled outside in the freezing dark, lanterns shaking in our hands. The roof sagged like a bowstring, and we know if we didn't act, it would collapse. "Grab the ladder!" Father shouted over the wind. We climbed, shoveling furiously, our fingers numb inside soaked gloves. Each scoop of snow felt like lifting a stone, but slowly, painfully, we cleared enough for the beams to hold. When we climbed down, our faces were white with frost, and our bodies shook from exhaustion. That was only the beginning. Christmas passed without celebration. We had no energy, no spirit for it. The village church bells rang, but we stayed home, tending to the animals, breaking ice in the troughs, carrying hay bales through chest-deep snow. The days blended into one another. Wake, work, collapse into sleep. One morning, I noticed our cow Marla limping. Panic shot through me. A lame cow in winter is no small thing. It can mean infection, weakness, and in the worst case, loss. I knelt beside her in the frozen straw, rubbing her leg, whispering, "You're going to be okay, girl. Just hold on." But my heart thudded with fear. Every animal mattered. Losing even one could break us. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard my parents whispering in the kitchen. The fire had burned low, casting shadows across their tired faces. "We can't let the children see how bad it is," my mother said softly. Father sighed. "I don't know if the food will last, and the well, if it freezes deeper, will be in trouble." I closed my eyes, pretending to sleep, but their words pressed on me like the snow pressing on our roofs. For the first time, I wondered if we would survive the winter at all.
The weeks that followed blurred together in a haze of cold and exhaustion. By mid-January, it felt like winter had swallowed us whole, leaving no trace of warmth or rest. The days were short, the nights endless, and survival had become the only rhythm of our lives. Each morning, I woke to the sound of the wind battering the walls, a constant reminder that outside lay a world of ice and snow. Getting out of bed was like stepping into another battle, my body stiff, my breath already turning white in the freezing air of our bedroom. I'd pull on layers of clothes, half frozen from the night, and force myself out into the storm. The worst of it was the water. Our well froze deeper than it ever had before. At first, we tried breaking through the ice with picks, but soon the cold drove it too deep. Father and I spent hours hauling buckets from the village pump half a mile away, dragging them on a sled across the snow. The water was heavy, the sled creaked and tipped, and sometimes the icy wind would sting so hard that tears froze instantly on our faces. But without water, the animals wouldn't last a day. One morning, as I struggled with the sled, my hands numb despite the gloves, Father stopped and leaned on his shovel. His shoulders slumped, and for the first time, I saw defeat in his eyes. "We can't keep this up," he muttered. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "We don't have a choice." He nodded slowly, and we pressed on. Inside the barns, the animals grew thinner. The haystack was shrinking faster than we wanted to admit. Each bale we carried down from the loft felt like a piece of hope slipping away. I could see the fear in my mother's eyes when she counted what was left, her lips pressed tight, though she said nothing. Marla, the cow who had limped, grew weaker. I sat with her in the evenings, rubbing her side, whispering to her as if words could heal. "Don't leave us, girl," I begged once, resting my forehead against her warm hide. She blinked slowly, her breath clouding the air, and I held on to that fragile sign of life as though it were a promise. The nights were the worst. The wind howled like wolves, and sometimes real wolves answered. Their cries echoed across the frozen fields, closer than ever before. One night, I heard them scratching at the far fence. Father and I rushed out with lanterns, the dogs barking wildly at our sides. Shadows moved in the snow, quick and silent. My heart hammered as I waved the lantern, shouting, throwing stones into the darkness. The wolves melted away, but the fear lingered long after. Another night, the power of the storm nearly broke us. The wind slammed against the barns until the walls trembled and the roof of the chicken coop tore open. Snow poured inside like a white flood. We scrambled with planks and nails, our fingers stiff and clumsy, working by lantern light as the blizzard screamed around us. I could barely hear my father's voice over the storm, only see his lips move as we fought to keep the structure standing. By the time we finished, the chickens huddled in silence, too terrified to make a sound. Food for ourselves grew scarce. Potatoes stored in the cellar began to sprout and rot. The bread was stretched thinner and thinner, and sometimes dinner was nothing but broth and boiled cabbage. Mother tried to smile as she served it, but her hands trembled, and the skin on her knuckles cracked and bled from the cold. One evening, I found her sitting alone at the kitchen table, staring at the single candle that flickered weakly. Her face was lined with exhaustion. "Are you all right?" I asked softly. She forced a smile. "I'm fine, just tired." But I knew it was more than that. The weight of the farm pressed on all of us, but on her, who kept the fire burning, who cooked, who mended, perhaps it was heaviest of all. As January dragged into February, despair settled in like frost creeping through the walls. The hay was almost gone, the well had frozen solid, and the cold showed no mercy. Then came the day I will never forget. It was a morning like any other, gray, freezing, silent. I trudged to the barn, my breath a fog before me, and opened the heavy wooden doors. Inside, Marla lay motionless in the straw. My chest clenched. I dropped to my knees beside her, shaking her shoulder, calling her name. For a terrible moment, I thought she was gone. But then she stirred, her eye fluttering open, dull but alive. Relief crashed over me, but so did the reality she was too weak to stand. "Father!" I shouted, my voice breaking. He rushed in, knelt beside me, and pressed his hand to her side. His jaw tightened. "She won't last without help." We spent that entire day nursing her, melting snow over the stove for water, mixing what little grain we had into mash, coaxing her to eat. I sang to her, stroked her neck, prayed silently, though I wasn't sure who I was praying to. By nightfall, she had taken a few mouthfuls, and we clung to that small miracle. But outside, the storm raged on. And deep down, I knew the hardest part was still ahead.
February bled into March, but the winter showed no sign of loosening its grip. Each morning I woke hoping to see the first hint of thaw, water dripping from the eaves, snow softening under the sun, but instead the world remained locked in white silence. The hay was nearly gone. What had once been a mountain in our barn loft was now only a few lonely bales, stacked like fragile treasures. We measured every flake, rationing it as if each strand of straw could buy us one more day. The animals' ribs began to show. Their eyes followed us with quiet desperation each time we entered the barn. The chickens laid fewer eggs, and the dogs grew thin despite sharing our scraps. Every living thing on the farm depended on us, and every decision we made was a choice between survival and sacrifice. One night, as I carried the last bale of hay down from the loft, I heard my father whisper to my mother in the kitchen. "If the snow doesn't break soon, we'll have to choose," he said grimly. "Choose what?" I asked, stepping into the room before I could stop myself. They froze. My mother's eyes filled with tears, and my father's face hardened. "Which animals we can keep alive," he admitted at last. The words struck me harder than the cold ever had. I stared at him, my throat too tight to speak. The idea of letting any of them go felt like surrender. They weren't just animals, they were part of us, part of the farm, part of our lives. That night, I lay awake listening to the wind. My chest ached with helplessness, but deep down, a spark of defiance stirred. I refused to give in. If winter wanted to crush us, it would have to fight harder. The next morning, I rose before dawn,
My fingers were raw and bleeding, my body weary, but I forced myself into the snow. I shoveled paths, gathered what dry branches I could find, and melted snow until my arms shook. Father joined me, wordless but determined, and soon the whole family worked side by side. We found forgotten sacks of grain in the loft, scraps of turnips buried in the cellar, even dried nettles near the hedges. We mixed them into feed, stretching every ounce. It wasn't much, but it was something. Marla, the cow who had nearly died, slowly gained strength. Each day she stood a little longer, ate a little more. Her breath puffed warm against my cheek when I leaned close, and I clung to her survival like proof that hope still lived. Then one morning, in late March, I opened the door and felt it, a shift. The air no longer bit as fiercely. The snow under my boots was softer, wetter. I lifted my face, and for the first time in months, I smelled something other than frost. The faint, damp promise of earth. Spring, I whispered. It didn't come all at once. The snow fought to hold on, melting by day, freezing again at night. But little by little, the ice loosened. The well began to flow. Water dripped from the eaves like music. Birds returned, their songs sharp and bright against the silence we had grown used to. The village stirred with life again. Neighbors who had been hidden in their homes like ghosts emerged to share stories of survival. Some had lost animals, some had nearly lost themselves, but we were all still standing, scarred but alive. The first true warm day, when the sun shone strong enough to melt the top layer of snow into glittering streams, I walked out to the fields. The earth beneath was battered, but it was there, dark, rich, waiting. I sank to my knees, pressing my hand into the damp soil, and felt tears sting my eyes. We had made it. That evening, as we sat by the stove with thin soup, Father raised his spoon. "To surviving," he said. We clinked spoons, laughter breaking through for the first time in months. The hardest winter we had ever faced was finally behind us. It had taken nearly everything we had, but it left us with something stronger than comfort or ease. The knowledge that we could endure, that even when the world froze over, even when hope seemed buried beneath snow and silence, we could fight. We could survive. And we did. And every spring since then, when I hear the first drip of melting snow, I remember that winter. I remember the hunger, the fear, the storms. But more than anything, I remember the stubborn flame that kept us alive. Because sometimes survival isn't just about food or fire. Sometimes it's about refusing to give up, no matter how long the winter lasts.
Thanks for watching. Don't miss the next story.